So moved.
Thank you. Second?
Second.
All in favor?
I read it. Don't look at me like that.
Okay, we have approved minutes. In a continuation of our theme on housing, we did update our housing policy. Lots of questions came up during those discussions, and we discussed putting out an RFP to get more quantitative and hard data on what exactly are the needs in the county. We all had anecdotal stories, but I think we're looking to get away from anecdotal. So the discussion today will really center around taking a look at RFPs that have already been submitted. One from Oswego that the details were just passed out here, and then we have one from Wayne County. So Anna, I don't know if you want to take us through this.
Yeah, I'll just set the stage and then we can open it up to conversation. The hope was that this could be kind of a working session and we can outline what might go into a COMIDA RFP for a housing study for Monroe County. Given the fact that, housing is a big topic, it's very important politically and otherwise, and we want to make sure that the study that we're commissioning is specific to the IDA and directing, making recommendations as to what lane does the County of Monroe Industrial Development Agency need to adhere to in facilitating and supporting needed housing developments in Monroe County.
Tell me.
So the authority's budget office, I've mentioned this in the past when we've come together. The authority's budget office has instructed, hi Joe, sorry.
Hey guys, sorry.
This is just a 2-page summary of a recent RFP that was issued by Oswego County's IDA around housing projects. You'll recall that the authority's budget office has instructed IDAs that seek to offer any kind of tax breaks for housing projects to establish and adhere to clear rules for housing projects for transparency and legality, and that should including housing in our mission statement, which COMIDA currently doesn't have the word housing in its mission statement as far as so that could be something that we can address if we choose to do so. And then furthermore, the ABO advised IDAs that want to support housing projects to commission a study that would, an empirical analysis that would help to advise as to how any given IDA should use its powers to support necessary housing projects. And this is obviously a legal gray area in the state of New York for many, many years. The I in Industrial Development Agency stands for industrial. Since the 80s, the interpretation by many IDAs has been that commercial housing projects are commercial and supportive of economic growth to some extent, and so in appropriate cases, market rate housing projects can pass muster in being eligible for tax breaks. And certainly the County of Monroe Industrial Development Agency has taken that route throughout its history. There's a piece of legislation that's in committee right now in Albany, and I don't know the likelihood. I don't see a path forward for it, but there is some advocacy, some policy advocacy from state lawmakers seeking clarity from the state in state law around IDAs and housing projects. There's an act in committee to amend the general municipal law in relation to making housing a policy of the state of New York and really specify what role IDAs should play. In the absence of that guidance, really it falls on local IDAs to interpret based on the dynamics of their own local economies what role they should play in facilitating housing projects. Governor Hochul passed the Pro-Housing Communities initiative towards the end of 2023. which does contemplate IDAs as a tool and a resource at the local level to stimulate new housing development and house it, municipalities that are designated as pro-housing communities are eligible for increased state grant support, and it's a policy that in general terms does contemplate IDAs as a resource to support more housing development. So I don't necessarily think, given the current dynamics of what's going on in our local economy, that COMIDA should run away from housing altogether. I think there's certainly a role that we should play, or at least that we should talk about playing. So with that in mind, many of our counterparts elsewhere in New York have embarked on this exercise and issued RFPs, one being Oswego County, which I put a summary in front of you. This was recent. The RFP was issued this year and responses were due in June. So as far as we understand, the Oswego County IDA is still making determination about next steps on that project and probably awarding the contract right in the current time frame. Wayne County's IDA issued an RFP in 2022. I just got a copy of their RFP. We do have a copy of Wayne County's housing study that they commissioned. The differentiating factor with Wayne is that the county's Department of Planning and Economic Development commissioned the study like in tandem with their IDA. So it makes certain recommendations on a macro policy level, countywide, around housing that I don't think we would necessarily need to contemplate in our RFP, because as you'll recall from our last COMIDA meeting, we're still in the process of finalizing the county's comprehensive plan, which certainly will take into account housing and the need for certain types of housing units in Monroe County. So with that, I just wanted to set the stage, wanted to talk about what might go into an RFP. Is this the path that we want to take? Last committee meeting, we did change our policy to go from 10% to 20%
Correct.
affordable unit requirement. And yeah, so that's where we are.
Thanks, Anna. Given this is our first meeting, I would say one of the things I would hope to at least come out of this meeting with is at least at a high percentage, 80, 90%, to say, what are we looking for our study to actually tell us? And some of the stuff I'll at least throw out there is pretty obvious. We're looking for where, if we take a look at the scope of work here at the Oswego, I think analyzing the second bullet point under scope of work, analyzing current condition, trends, and market gaps, I would say, that any studies, we're going to want to see that. And then the third bullet, as best they can, estimate the demand and investments, and then see where that gap is. But the one thing that, as I went through this, and I just went through it quickly, and I'll throw this out there for discussion, just because there's a gap doesn't mean that we as the IDA should get involved. I think we need to really take a look and say, will that gap be filled by the market?
Exactly.
Where is current rents, and is it attractive enough to just spur private development? I think the more interesting question is when there is a gap and the market will not fill that gap naturally, that's where the IDA really has a role to play. Mm-hmm. So that was an editorial. I'll throw that out there for discussion to say, do people agree? Do they think I'm full of hooey? But I think that is, well, on this particular topic, Norman.
In general, Jay, just on this topic.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go sit over there because I feel like we're all sitting in a line.
Oh yeah.
I didn't say anything, Jay.
You didn't have to.
Come on, man.
I liked the final deliverable. Here's where we're going. This is what we expect at the end of this study. Mm-hmm. I think that's a sort of a top of the line way to to look down. I'm sure Wayne County maybe has some separate steps for deliverables, but it's just interesting to see there that that's what they determined was important for them to analyze and understand the market conditions.
Yeah.
So here's what the county legislature is looking at right now. It's a very simple question. Who doesn't have housing?
Wow. So,
Poor people.
wow.
Yeah.
Here's what you got to keep in mind. What you said makes total sense. There are certain markets in Wayne County that are not going to get filled because it's Wayne County.
Yeah, it's
no
totally
disrespect to
different
Wayne
economy,
County, okay?
yeah.
It's not, if you tell me go build market housing in Wayne County, thank you so much. Joe, we want you to go invest X amount of dollars in market housing in Wayne County. That's a completely different rate of return that I would get in Monroe County. So Wayne County is a completely different animal. And what you said, Jay, you were spot on in every point you made. So because there's a hole, doesn't mean we need to step in. What we need to be smart enough to know is where to step in, right? Where is housing not as profitable for a developer where they need a little nudge?
And that's what the guidance that we should look for, right?
And clearly, without a report, without anything, Section 8 is a huge problem in Monroe County.
Yes.
It's a problem in the entire state. But in Monroe County, it's a big problem. It's a big problem because it's not as profitable. It's a manager heavy, right? So every unit gets inspected twice a year. And a lot of landlords are like, I don't want no one inspecting my units. So, right? I don't want anybody coming in going, fix this, fix this, fix this. So that part of the market is always going to be a hole. And I put to everybody here, if you incentivize profitable housing development that's profitable on its own, that's going to get developed on its own, those developers are going to go there. There's no incentive for somebody to build low-income or Section 8 housing. There's just not.
So I'm
So,
going to say, if it's profitable as it is, developers are there already.
they're going to do it on their own.
Providing additional incentives,
That's right.
it starts to distort market.
It does. That's right.
So now what,
And let me just finish my thought, because there's another piece to it too that I want everybody to make sure you understand. So as apartments age, right? So I own an apartment complex. It was built in the 70s. It's got new windows, it's got new roofs, it's as good as you can get it, but it's still 70s built. So that which when it was built was at market housing or even a little above, is now low-end workforce housing because of the style. And no matter what you do to it, so organically that housing morphs into that. But it's never going to turn into Section 8 housing because there's no incentive to turn it into Section 8 housing, right? You lose money. Every developer that owns one, it just costs them money and it costs them headaches. So that's where I think we need to make sure that we step in and get involved, because those are the people that really need it.
Right.
And it's not, and there's no way to get that housing off the ground. You know, today a developer's not going to move into town, or a local developer's not going to go, hey, let's take a piece of land that we have, and I don't care where it is in the county, let's put Section 8 there. They're just not thinking of that.
I think one issue with Section 8, and I tried calling and couldn't get through. I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
I also follow, what local leaders have been criticizing on social media and stuff about Section 8. One issue is the bond cap allocation with regard to IDAs. So with Section 8 housing in particular, we are more limited today than we were last year because of state law, right, Rachel?
Yeah, so there's a couple things at play with the IDA's involvement in Section 8 housing. One, we can provide our standard suite of benefits, including bond financing. we are provided volume cap every year. Volume cap is an allocation from the federal government to the state, and then the state allocates based on county population. Comes to the IDA, we get roughly between 28 and $30 million each year in volume cap allocation. That means we can only issue tax exempt bonds up to that amount unless we get more from the statewide reserve. We got our money, our volume cap allocation in January. We allocated it to Andrews Terrace, so it's gone. We do not have volume cap for the balance of 2024. We won't have it again until 2025. So that's the volume cap restriction. The second restriction is that's causing developers not to participate in Section 8 housing is this, there's a 4% there's tax credits available to developers of truly affordable regulated housing. The state has said that they will not sign off, in so many words, on the tax credits if the IDA is the issuer of the bonds on a rehab project. On a new construction project, they will, but it's taking an extremely long time, and I'm not aware of an IDA project that's gotten through the process. Rehab projects like Sycamore Green, which we did induce, is indefinitely delayed because of this change. And this rulemaking, it came out quite literally like December 31st or January 1st. I mean, came out of the blue, no one was prepared for it. And it has caused a tremendous amount of issues. If you have a minute, you can see the Onondaga County executive has been very vocal about it. It is creating a number of issues statewide. The rationale is that, to the state, is that the volume cap is so limited. IDA projects, including ours, we're taking a lot of volume cap at the detriment of state issuers who can issue bonds, and primarily some downstate projects with some very loud advocacy that got to the state. And Anna got a call at one point, very disgruntled state individual, about the amount of volume cap that our project had taken.
How do you have to deal with disgruntled people?
Yeah, believe it or not.
It's the most pleasant person, why not?
That's shocking, Anna, really.
But as a reminder about Andrews Terrace, it's 526 units of Section 8 housing.
It's big.
Every balcony on that building, which you can see from almost any vantage point in the city, had been condemned. And so they were unsafe, structurally unsafe. So that project was extremely expensive rehab per unit, and it did require a tremendous amount of bonds and volume cap. But at the end of the day,
and it was important.
It was
incredibly important.
so
it was
important.
needed.
Oh, yeah.
So important.
So we stand by our push on getting the
100%.
volume cap, but that's, I hope, helps understand how limited we are at this juncture.
So
With
let me ask you
Section
a
8,
question.
with
So-
affordable.
So if somebody came
Yeah.
in and wanted to build affordable, put the bond aside.
Yeah.
They could still get a tax abatement from us. Sales tax and
Well, if
mortgage
they're
tax.
nonprofit, they can't, but if they're
No,
Yeah,
but if
they're
they're
they're a
for-profit.
if they're for-profit, they could.
They
Right?
can.
Now,
The other-
now, Joe, are you talking, when you say affordable, is it affordable or Section 8? I just want to make sure
Yeah.
we're being precise with our language here.
Either one.
Okay.
Either one,
Yeah.
right? So I know a developer that all he used to do is build Section 8. And then he stopped. He does market housing now. And I reached out to him and asked him why. And he said, well, comically, he said, what, I can get incentives on normal housing. Why would I want to deal with all that headache?
So bingo, right? That's where we want to, so I think as
That's it.
we look at this, I think we have to separate out Section 8, because what I'm hearing is there are particular issues with Section 8 that are going to be above our pay grade.
Yeah.
Our ability to
Right.
affect, right? And if there are limitations, that's a bigger battle that the county exec and
But-
our
The
our
state
legislators,
delegation,
have to. But I think one of the things we want to look at is, let's get away from Section 8, and I'm just going to do it as a kind of a ladder, that next level, which is not Section 8, but is affordable. If there's a gap there, then I think one of the things we need to know is, is there a gap?
Right.
And how long is that gap projected to grow or decline in the future? And if it's not profitable, then how can we make that so incentivize developers to go from a luxury development, or equally consider a luxury development in Pittsburgh and an affordable housing in whatever town.
And there's
And
only one way
is-
to do it.
Yeah, and is that either that, I mean, the tools we have are limited. It's a pilot, right?
Right.
Do we look and say, if you do an affordable pilot, and this is where I think we need to then have a little more analysis. I don't know if this is in the RFP or that comes out of the RFP, would be, hey, if you do, and if you want to do an affordable unit, we have to define what that is. We would incentivize you with a certain pilot. It might be 20 years.
Right.
And it might be, hey, in the first 10 years, it's much more aggressive, and then it ramps up. So our standard pilot now ramps up 10% a year. Maybe this one ramps up 5% a year, or, you know, it's fixed for the first 5 years at a 0% or a 5, whatever it is.
Yeah.
I think those are what we look at, and we say this is going to be what we incentivize, or this is what we have on the table to incentivize Mr. or Ms. Developer
Right.
to come in and do those units and be able to say they are.
And that same developer that I talked to, if he was incentivized to say, okay, you can build Section 8 and you can get a pilot, whether it's 10 years, 20 years, whatever it is, and you're not going to pay property taxes, that's a huge, huge advantage. And it offsets the difficulty and the profit margin piece.
Well, and we have to remember, there's two things that have to come into play here. Is that if we do that, we also, part of this study and part of our thought process has to be, what do we do, if anything, on luxury housing? If luxury housing is profitable on its own, we want to dial that back to kind of equalize the incentive. Because if we say, hey, we're going to do it for affordable, we're also going to do it for luxury, then we could face the situation that the developer's saying, well, why would I do this when I can get another incentive?
Right.
It might be a 10-year pilot, not a 20-year, but still, luxury's still where I want to put my money. And I think we want to start to equalize those and be able to say, hey, a developer in our imaginary world here should be agnostic.
Yeah.
And if anything, should probably say, hey, you know what, with these incentives, because if the gap is greater for affordable housing, there's more incentives to do affordable than there are luxury.
And then you let the free market system work
Absolutely.
itself out, right?
That's
Other housing that's profitable, it'll get developed.
Yeah.
I know, it'll get developed for sure. So it'll get bought, it'll get developed, it'll get fixed up because it's profitable.
So,
Rachel was trying to.
No, go ahead, Norm.
Sorry, she had her
may I
hand up
speak?
first,
Thank you.
but yes, you can go ahead.
I thought our process was gonna be an RFQ at first, and then RFP. That's usually, a good way of doing it, so you eliminate a lot of the folks who are not really in the, what we want, so we can select the responders from the RFQ to respond to an RFP. That's what I
Can you
thought.
explain that a little more? Because
RFQ
Yeah.
versus RFP?
yeah, I mean, I know what they are, but I'm trying to get where you're coming
The
from.
RFQ is you send out requests for qualifications.
Right,
You're asking people who are, show me your qualifications to respond to our RFP. Once you get the list of those individual entities, then you ask them to respond. If they meet your criteria, you ask them to respond to your RFP. It kind of gives you a way of selecting who's the best for you, your interests. But if that's not, if you want to just go right to an RFP, I understand. But it's really a good way of shifting, getting the wheat from the chaff, So that's a process that's usually the approach you would take for something this significant. The second thing I'd like to say, excuse me,
No, please.
is that I know Oswego County is doing it, but if we're going to do a comparison, let's do a comparison with someone who's almost like us. The last time I No, I seen it, you know.
Yeah,
Monroe
much
County's-
smaller.
Monroe
Right.
County is like almost 1 million people.
Yes, this is a much smaller county.
Yeah, so-
Wayne,
and-
obviously,
And
it's
a
a
different
different.
economic
And,
stuff
and,
too.
and
Yep.
we have within our vicinity, I don't know how many colleges that's around.
Yeah.
So I think, you know, if we're gonna do it, let's have
Sure.
a comparison.
For purposes of today's conversation, we
Okay, all
drew
right.
from examples that were available that we could find from other IDAs, not really taking into account the demographics.
And something, and the last thing, then I'll be quiet, is that I don't think we should just limit it to New York State in regards to RFP responders or RFQ, set up the qualifications. I think it should be almost on a national basis. Because as you talk about Section 8, Section 8 is not a state-sponsored program. It's a federal program, and there's some best practices out there on a federal basis that possibly we can learn from. That's my 2 cents, and now Jay, go ahead.
No, I think those are some good points. The one thing that I would, rather than do a two-step process with a qual and a RFP, because I think that'll lengthen it, my suggestion is we do an RFP with a potential shortlist and presentation. So, you know, and we can, you know, then we can come in and really ask, you know, if we get significant responses, we can say, hey, these people just don't seem like they're even qualified. We've got 5 responses. These 2 look really good. Let's bring them in for a shortlist interview and do a deeper dive into them. I think it'll speed it along.
Usually the queues, someone that does a queue, they can respond to your request in a week or 2 weeks. Say, these are our qualifications.
But then we have to do.
Then you do another, no. So how much time are you gonna ask them to respond to the RFP? So you can do a queue, they can respond, this is who we are. We plan to respond to your RFP when presented, but this is who we are. If you like what they present to you, then you do an RFP, and you can really, you know, whittle down that time frame. It'll probably can be more efficient if you take it that way, if you use that approach. But
Yeah, I mean, but I think your point of trying to make sure we get the best qualified individual, and we can talk about how best to do that. I think when we look at this, regardless of the size of the county, and this is my viewpoint, the objectives are going to be the same. You know, so I think as we take a look at when you do a housing study, whether it be for a smaller community. Now this, I think, comes back to the qualifications. I think what we would look for is if we had ABC Corporation, you know, or ABC Consulting that came in and did this, we want to make sure they have examples of doing housing studies with counties the size of Monroe County and with the variety that we see here, the universities, you know, and I think.
I disagree. Because, you know, if you're talking Section 8, if you're talking about the centers in Rochester, where in Rochester, the highest child poverty in the country, and you're talking about the disparities that are out there, and Joe, you can attest to it, that I guarantee you, if we don't do a deep dive on the numbers of what's going on with our study, we're going to be at square one, because we won't have the information to back up saying we need to invest this amount of our resources into Section 8 because the study tells us this based on the information that's gathered. So I think you really have to have individuals that are going to say, all right, we're going to look at what's going on from a holistic approach from all the zip codes within our region, and that's what you have to do.
I don't, go ahead, Joe.
I think we're all saying the same thing.
Right.
I do. I think we're saying the same thing. I know what that study is going to show. I don't need a study, but we need to get one. And I think it's smart that we get a study. And I can tell you that study is going to show Section 8 is a big problem. Low-income housing is a big problem. And it's a huge problem. And I think we have a moral obligation to do whatever we can do to make sure that people have a place to live that's safe and clean, and they don't have the sewer dripping down.
Where's your study at?
I just said, you gotta get.
I know, I'm just saying.
I don't need it,
but if you come to me, I'm gonna say, where's your study?
That's what
That's what we're talking about.
I know,
Yeah.
but
you gotta get one.
And it will, furthermore, it will take into account current market dynamics.
Exactly.
I think one thing I want to point out from the Oswego County RFP is that it specifically outlines the fact that the Micron project is getting underway, which is leading to increased housing demand. So that's like a premise for them doing the study. We want to take into account what's happening in our very local economy here in Monroe County and our workforce. What are our current workforce needs? Interest rates are higher right now. Maybe they're going to come down in the fall. We don't know. As far as I understand, the higher interest rate environment, the escalating costs in the recent handful of years have made it more, upstate housing developers have been more apt to come to IDAs seeking tax breaks because of that higher cost environment. We want to take that into consideration as well. The problem that we're trying to solve in its most basic characterization is we need more housing units, really across every income bracket, but specifically at the lowest income and middle income brackets. And we need more inventory. And how does COMIDA enter the fray? How do we use our powers for good? Is there a pilot structure that could levy some weight on the scales to help encourage developers like your friend to do more for people of lower income? Maybe they're for poorer households who perhaps don't qualify for Section 8. There are limited.
Well, those complexes he would do, understand how this works. So if Norm was a developer and Jay was a developer and I was a developer and I said, okay, I'm gonna build low income and I'm gonna certify my complex for Section 8, but that doesn't mean an applicant comes that doesn't qualify yet, I can still rent to them. That just means my rent is in that window. And then you can accept Section 8 too. So you can do both. And then there's complexes that are strictly all Section 8. And those are the ones that Rachel was talking about. They get bonded and all of that. But you could today go out and develop a brand new low-income housing development. And that's what used to happen all the time. And it doesn't anymore. And it doesn't anymore for all those economic reasons that I mentioned to you. So if we can incentivize the developers, if the three of us were gonna develop one, and Jay said to himself, Joe, I can go to Committee and I don't even need to pay property taxes for 10 years on this thing. Or I just developed one and I'm paying my property taxes on it. Now we're in the same pool. And I'm hoping to get renters and I have to wait and cultivate that and he'll have a line out the door. So that's
exactly where we want to be. It's where a developer's going to say, pause for a minute and say,
yes,
let me, before I decide to put these.
And I'll tell you guys, and this is just a personal thing. It's got nothing to do with being a board member. But I go look at apartment complexes for sale every week. People call me, we go look at them every week. And I just looked at a low income project that's full and had people living in it. And I said to the broker, you should be ashamed of yourself. Like it's an out-of-state owner. There's people living in squalor. It made me, I would not even walk in one of the units because I didn't want it. Like I would have threw my shoes away. And that's where you could tell that there was a leak from the bathroom upstairs. And there's people living like this.
What was the property on Lake Avenue? Remember in July? What was the name? Remember that property?
I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah. I mean,
Terrible.
I was there and I know what you're talking about. But
the sad part, Norm, is like as I'm walking through that complex, those people have nowhere to go.
I understand, but
so they can't tell the landlord to go pound sand and move out.
They have nowhere to go because there's no inventory.
There's no inventory.
Isn't there a disconnect with what Rachel was telling us and what the governor wants? I I think what we're spinning our wheels because we want to do these things to incentivize low income Section 8. But then, there's a cap. So how I guess that's one of the things that I don't know, how do you advocate for
I
that?
think we want to separate two things up. I think there are limitations with Section 8.
Section 8, right.
Right, but I think when it comes to, I'm going to call it workforce or low
income, right?
Right, those are where we have more discretion.
Correct.
And I think that's.
And you could put Section 8 in them, Norm.
Right.
You know what I mean? A complex could be low income, not get bonded through the state, none of that. Just,
have individuals that.
Yeah.
correct. And that complex can take low income and it can take Section 8 if somebody qualifies.
But I heard that you can get funding for new
New
housing,
construction.
but not renovation.
Right.
And so I think that's the area that I would be concerned with.
But you could do that, if somebody came in front of us that had a low-income housing complex that's on the tax rolls now, and we said, we'll give you mortgage tax, sales tax, and property tax abatement on it. They can take now their balance sheet and they can walk into ESL or Canandaigua and go, hey, I need to borrow $2 million. And all of a
To
sudden,
rehab this
it's
building.
profitable.
Yeah.
But that's not what happened over at Andrews Terrace. So that's the one that.
But Andrews Terrace is Section 8.
Strictly.
So I want
We're
to
talking about
separate
two different
those
things.
Yeah, low income.
Two different things, Norm.
And we need to do all of the above.
Right.
And I don't want to get too
Okay.
spinning our wheels on Section 8 where it's more complex. There's more players involved. Whereas low income, we may be able to do just on our own.
So we approved Sycamore Green.
Yeah.
And people are living at Sycamore Green now, and it's not very,
And the project is on hold.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So
For the
that's-
reasons that Rachel
Yeah,
outlined.
so I'm saying, it's great that we're doing all this, but if we approve something, it was approved over a year and a half ago. And the state is now changing the rules in the middle of the game.
Yes.
And how do you advocate?
Right.
Or
Well,
how
as
does-
Jay pointed
Right.
out, our state delegation, the county executive, the mayor, our local leaders do need to come together. Like Rachel pointed out that the Onondaga County executive has made this a priority of his administration. I think that's something we should advocate for. But that's not necessarily within the scope of what we're looking to do today. Here, we're looking for guidance for a COMIDA policy and COMIDA action on market rate housing projects. And market rate doesn't mean luxury necessarily. Market rate, when I'm thinking about market rate, I'm thinking about units that are being rented out to poor, lower income individuals, working class individuals that might be considered workforce housing. And like what role, I'm looking for guidance on what role should COMIDA play. If we can't influence policy around Section 8,
Right.
what should we be doing given
Right.
current
How can we
market?
incentivize that?
The
Right.
example would be, would be what we saw with Westport Crossing. Instead of them saying, I'm looking to put units there that rent for $4,000 a month, we want them to have a debate saying, maybe I should put units there that rent for $800 a month. Right now, that's not what they're considering. So that's relative. But one thing I want to come back to, and I guess a question that Norman brought up is, I know we've looked at IDAs within the state. If we're looking for some of these RFPs or these studies, like I would love to see what the Wayne County study actually delivered. Is there a way to get studies that have been done in other states, maybe in metro areas of our magnitude, just to read them and say, hey, what did they deliver? And it may guide what we want to put in our RFP. Let's, I think that's a good suggestion that Norm had, which is let's look outside of the state, because other communities are grappling with this as well.
So
Yeah.
I just.
How long does it take to get a study, Norm, I think?
It depends on how detailed you want to be. But I just want a point of clarification. Are we talking about just market rate housing or a housing study altogether? Because if it's just market rate, I thought we were going to be talking about the whole gambit. So, I think if we're not talking about the whole gambit of housing, we're missing the boat. Because
Right.
it's just not market rate. It's just not high end. It's the whole, if you're going to do a study, Look at the big picture.
Well,
Look
I
at
thought that's
everything.
what we were gonna do.
Yeah,
We're
no,
gonna
but
do
she
it.
said we're just looking at market rate right now.
No,
That's
but,
right.
yeah, but market rate could be from $800 a month to,
Anything that's
I
not.
think it's a comprehensive study. I think
Exactly.
maybe, I think what you're trying to say is our ability to assist with the current situation that we think, we don't know until we have a study, is going to be a market rate. There's only so much we can do with Section 8.
Right.
The study will be
We need
comprehensive.
to look at everything,
Yes.
okay? Because if not, we're gonna be back here talking about this again in 6 weeks, 6 months,
What I
whatever.
would like to see you do is who needs housing?
Exactly.
And find out really, and kind of what's going on. We're doing the same thing in the legislature right now, and it's budget season. So there's gonna be some kind of proposal to address housing, but we're flying kind of blind.
Right,
I mean, everybody has an opinion about what's needed. I
right,
think you need experts to tell you, here's who needs housing and why.
right.
but let me push on this just for, for discussion purposes here. If we can't affect Section 8, right, and we have severe limitations with Section 8, should we have a study that looks at that? Or should we focus just on market rate housing and say, this is really what we're interested in because that's what we can affect? If the study comes back and says there's a huge gap on Section 8 housing, which which we suspect it might, what do? What actions do we take? And if the answer is there's nothing we can do, then
See, but I think the answer is you can incentivize lower income housing that can accept Section 8.
but
That's what you can do.
but so this is what I'm trying to. What are we going to do? What do we want to study here? So we don't want to study pure Section 8. That's it.
No, I wouldn't do that.
Right? We want to study, because we know even if there is a need, which we all suspect there will be, there's very little we're going to be able to come back and say we can do, because of just there's so many other players and factors. So if we look at market rate housing that can accept Section 8 and then market all the way kind of up, I think that will provide us actionable information.
Yeah.
And
I want to ask kind of, and this could be a very silly question, and it's an uninformed question. Can you address someone who would live in Section 8 housing without them being on Section 8?
I actually don't know.
Wait, say that again?
There's qualifications to get Section 8 housing.
Yes.
Could you just provide that without calling it Section 8?
Well, I'll give you an example. So I have an apartment building, and I just put a whole new protocol in place, right? So I had an apartment building. We had a lady living there. I think I mentioned this to you before. She fell ill, right? She's a widow. She applies for, she really can't afford where she's at, so she qualifies for Section 8. Section 8 gave her, it was ridiculous, she'll be dead. So,
The queue to get Section 8.
just to get in the queue, to get a unit, right? So, somebody that worked for me went to Section 8, got the complex approved, and now she's gonna get Section 8 in the apartment she's in. Why a lot of people don't do it is now they're gonna come and inspect every unit in the building, which I don't care. So let them come and inspect it, so it's fine. So I don't have to accept Section 8, or I can. Now that complex that we're doing it in is economically, if I did it for everybody, you'd go bad, because it's just economically doesn't make sense. But there are apartment complexes that can get built that could be affordable housing in areas where the dirt is a little less expensive than in Pittsburgh, right? But good areas where you can build low-income housing where the average apartment for a 2-bedroom is under $1,000, right? And much under $1,000. That complex, you can get low income and they can accept Section 8. But it doesn't have to be a Section 8 complex, because that's a whole different dynamic.
That was one of the questions, so you
Right?
could actually address.
And we used to have a lot of that. And the reason I know is because I used to own some of them, right?
Ridgeway Gardens, Fielding Gardens, Penfield Skyline, those were all Section 8, partial Section 8s, all of them. Today, none of them are. And all landlords go to that because, you know, as you invest money in it, you don't need to be Section 8 anymore. You don't need to jump through the hoops that go along with Section 8, and you kind of get away from it. And that's what landlords do.
So Joe, based on what you're saying or what you had said before about market rate, we can accept market rate, the range of dollars. That would help solve this discussion, correct? Market rate housing going down to, you know, under $1,000 like you're saying.
Right. You could definitely
make it a bigger picture.
Do that. And I think you do a study that looks at the whole picture from Section 8 all the way to the top, and you see where it is. Part of that study, the market's got to take care of itself. Part of the study where we're smart enough to know people are just not going to develop in that range, that's where we need to put incentives in place.
And are those Section 8 housing areas, are they all contiguous? Are they all sort of lumped together if you had a map?
No, they're all scattered all over.
Are they?
They're all over the place. And I mean, I remember a time, and again, I've been doing this a long time, but I remember a time there was Section 8, there was no shortage. It was everywhere. You know, so I bought an apartment complex in Irondequoit, right near Wegmans on Hudson Avenue. I don't know, I've owned it like 18 years now or something. When I bought it, it was not Section 8 anymore. But when it was built, it was all Section 8. Today, there's not one Section 8 person living in it. And it was like that when I bought it. That's the rub. So now you tell a developer, hey, you know, you can build these apartments on the water in Pittsburgh and, you know, we'll give you incentives. Well, developers, why would that guy look at Section 8? Why would anybody look at Section 8? They just wouldn't. So now your problem you know, all we're doing is making the problem worse.
Made the problem worse.
We're not making it better. So, and let me tell you, I look at, we have an obligation, not just as a board, but just as human beings. Like, I look where I just saw people living, and it made me sick. You know, there's like
children there.
Little kids. There's little kids in there. I got in my car. I called my daughter. I'm like, I'm sick. I said, if we have anybody that's lived in our places that have been there longer than 5 years, they're long-standing tenants, they qualify for Section 8, let them have it.
It's that mantra, housing is a human right. You know, everybody deserves a clean, safe place to live, dry.
Correct.
You know, with running
that the
water.
bathroom works.
Yeah,
you
right. And we want to encourage that. What I'm looking for as putting my executive director hat on, I want to prevent, you know, I want to get rid of this environment where any old developer thinks that they can come to me and Robin with an application based on our current policies and protocol.
I agree.
Or for any old housing project, and that we have to make a determination at the staff level as to whether a project should come before the board or not. I want there to be very clear, black and white.
I agree.
These are the types of projects that we need. These are the projects that we don't want to see. If your project meets this criteria, come on down. If not, then you're playing in the free market. I think the study, it'll be hopefully from a good consultant, could be from out of state. I think one of the examples, I think Wayne contracted with an out of state consultant.
It wasn't Wayne, it was another one.
Another one.
Wayne used MRB.
So there are out of state consultants that have expertise in this space that have probably worked with bigger metropolitan areas that have demographics and dynamics that are not dissimilar from Monroe counties in the city of Rochester. They can make recommendations about what are the types of rents that we should be dictating and monitoring.
Right.
And they can take into account, okay, you've got the Fairlife project coming online, you've got all these different projects under construction, jobs coming online, these are the types of wages that are being paid by these different employers. You know, what is U of R paying? And like, how much can you afford to pay in rent if you work as a janitor at the University of Rochester? You know what I mean? So we're looking for that type of empirical economic data so that we can say, all right, if your housing project meets these criteria, come to COMIDA, we can talk. But if not, there's the door.
So the one thing we need, and I just want to, is I think we have to be careful in saying if that study comes back and says, these are the needs, that we do the analysis to determine what is profitable and what is not.
Yeah.
I think that study's gotta do that, or at least provide an
Recommendations.
overview of that, because that is, to your point, when you and Robin look at a developer, right? And the developer comes in and says, hey, we wanna do luxury housing, and they're gonna give you every reason under the sun as to why they need it. We can look and say, hey, our study says you should make profit just fine.
Yeah.
And we're not buying it. Now, if you want to come in and do these, rents in this range, we're all about it. And because there's an asymmetric information, the developer's never going to show us their real books. They're gonna tell you every reason under the sun why
can't pencil it in,
yeah.
A perfect
And
example.
we've seen that's simply not true. We have seen that.
In a perfect example, okay, I'll give you two examples.
Yeah.
So across from Oak Hill, across from Kilbourne, that project, right? Great developer, did a beautiful job, does not need a tax abatement.
I'll give you some history on that. They came before us and
I remember.
They talked about increased material cost, increased
I know,
financing
I
costs,
know.
all that, and we said no.
But Jay, why
And it
not?
got built.
If you're them,
I agree.
why
Absolutely.
not?
Absolutely.
If it's there for the taking.
Right.
And that's what I want to prevent.
And I'm gonna
Absolutely.
give you another
Yeah.
one. So Bob Morgan and some developers are building a huge apartment complex in Penfield.
Oh, I saw that right
And
on
they thought they
250.
could come to COMIDA, right?
They were gonna come to
They were gonna
Comida,
come to
Yes.
COMIDA.
right? And I remember at the time, the contractor reached out to me because they wanted to know if I wanted to invest.
Yeah.
Hey, do you want to become a partner with us in this complex?
Mm-hmm.
We're gonna go to Comida, we're gonna get a tax abatement. So they showed me a pro forma. The guy that sent it to me, such a clueless, he didn't know I was on the board. Hey, look, we're gonna get a tax abatement. We're not gonna pay taxes for 10 years. Look at all the money we're gonna make. So I laughed and I said to him, look, I'm not a partner guy. I would do it on my own. If you guys want to sell it, let me know. And that was the end of the conversation. But it's getting built and they're gonna make really good money. It's gonna go well. And there's not one affordable apartment in that complex.
How
we
many,
can go
how many
after-
units?
300.
And we can
Good
go
size.
example after example. Like we saw that where, hey, affordable doesn't pencil, right? And then 24 hours later, it does.
And I don't know if you guys, Apple Annie's,
Yeah,
right? So we did that,
it's an IDA project.
right? It's an idea project. Look at the rents Apple Annie's getting compared to where they started. That project is so profitable. It should be on the tax rolls.
So that's really where we look and say, we need the study to inform us of that as well.
I agree.
Because that's gonna give the ammunition and say, hey, here it is, here's the public
I
study.
agree.
So that's, I think, gotta be part of what happens here. And I'm okay if we go the whole gambit, but what we want is an analysis, more of an economic analysis on the market rate
Yes.
and above. And the market rate starting at above Section 8,
And
all
then
the
I
way,
think once we get
all
that,
the way up to.
then once we get that study, then we can build out
Right.
a formula to say, okay, developers.
Correct.
This is, so now if they come to On and the staff, they don't get beat up by people that.
Joe, that's exactly right. Like if we look and say, hey, that rent from we'll use the 2-bedroom, that rent from 1,000 to 1,500.
Right.
The return, the ROI is 6%, where when you look at 3,500 and above, it's 18 or 20%.
Right.
All right, how can we do something to bring these
Right.
things closer together?
Right, and that's where you throw incentives at.
Correct, yep.
And we
Bingo.
dictate, hey, the rent's gotta be in this window, right? The rent's gotta be in this window and you can come in front
And
of
these
us.
are and then this is a study then you can update every 3-5 years
That's how you do
as
it.
market condition changes.
So how
And
long
then-
will it take us to get the first phase of that study?
This says 6 to 8
It
months.
said 6 to 8, that doesn't mean that,
I think
I
that
could
seems-
spend a year on it,
I think this seems long. I think,
Yeah.
because I don't think there's primary research people have to do. I think you can get incomes and rents.
Pretty easily.
Are available from public sources, and then it's really the analysis. So I would say, to me, my gut tells me 6 months is a reasonable window.
Okay.
So how long on it do you think before we can get somebody hired to do this study?
let's look to.
Yeah, so I'm glad we did this because the economic analysis, I don't think any of us thought about that you've raised, and I don't know that the vendors that we had originally considered will be able, I don't know if they can provide that economic
But
analysis.
sometimes you have to partner.
Right, so we may be,
We're housing experts,
yeah,
and now we're gonna bring in an accounting firm or
Yeah,
whatever.
right. We're gonna bring in a forensic economist that's
Right.
gonna put the numbers together and tie
and
it together.
I think what Norm and Jay, you echoed about issuing the RFP on a broader platform than we're used to is also a good idea to get, I suspect there are consultants and vendors that can provide the work, but not the ones that we had originally considered, but we can partner with.
Yeah.
Brett, sorry, yes, go ahead.
Just real quick, so is there gonna be a need, or should we consider putting a moratorium while we're waiting for the study, waiting for the RFP, so that we don't have, I mean, I know we've changed things a little bit, they have to make 2 visits and everything else, but
That's probably a good thought.
we don't wanna rush through this process, we want it to be proper, and you're right saying that we should be able to figure things out on our own. Do we need to do anything in the here and now?
I'll go, my reaction is, I don't think we should do that. I don't think we wanna, we modified our policy to go to 20%.
Okay.
And I think we did that with the idea that, hey, it's a place we feel comfortable in the interim while we get this study, but
Yeah, we talked about it at last committee meeting, making that 20% change and taking in projects while we commission the study.
Yeah.
And going back to, I made the point off the top of the meeting that this state law around IDAs has a lot of gray area when it comes to this subject of housing, which is why the authority's budget office has kind of put the onus back on IDAs to seek out information like this and kind of formalize the recommendations into our bylaws and policies. I want to get to a place where COMIDA, there's no gray area
I agree.
on our policies and on our books, so that we're not stuck at the staff level being like, well, I guess it sounds like a good project, but based on the current makeup of our board and like, I don't want to make those determinations.
Yeah.
I want to look at the facts. And
You want it black and white, here's a criteria, you qualify, you don't.
It'll make it easier for everybody.
But Rhett, that's a really good point. I agree with Jay, that's what, we made some changes so we could move forward, but it's a good point, and I see where you're going with it, it makes sense. But hopefully this does not take us
I don't think
6
it'll
months.
take us, it's like Jay pointed out, the information is out there, we just need somebody to help organize it.
Yeah.
As part of that comprehensive plan, which is what, still a year and a half away from maybe.
Yes, the
We're
comp
not
plan
gonna get
will,
tied up in that knot, right?
no, the comprehensive plan will certainly be advising, making recommendations around housing needs in Monroe County, but it's a comprehensive plan, so it's gonna be looking at a whole bunch of other different policy
Doesn't
priority
relate to
areas,
it.
so it's not really going to drill into the level of detail that we're gonna be needing. I'm looking for a specific, give me guidance on how the Industrial Development Agency in Monroe County in 2024 and beyond should be involved in incentivizing housing
Makes total
projects,
sense.
you
What you're
know?
saying makes total sense.
Norman,
Should we look at changing the mission statement to include housing?
I think we could and we should.
Yeah, I made a note that that'll be part of what we're doing.
But
I made a note
I think you should wait for the study to get done.
Yeah.
And then once we determine the criteria, then I think you put that in the mission statement. I wouldn't, that's what I would do.
I would agree with that.
We're waiting to the study, but we're doing housing now, and the housing is.
We are doing it.
I mean, the last
That's
last
that's
six-
actually a decent point.
The last 6 governance meetings we talked about is housing.
Yeah.
And we're doing housing, and housing is a big factor.
It's a good point.
And
No,
if that's not part of our mission, I mean.
No,
But
it's
I still think,
Yeah.
I mean, it hasn't been in the mission statement for years, and we've been doing it for years. So I don't think it changes anything.
I haven't been on the board
The one thing,
for
Joe,
years,
that I
and
think-
what I'm saying is that for us, from a process standpoint, I'm a process person. If we're gonna be, I've been, every government's meeting I've been on, every governance, we talked about housing. And we don't change that right now, what are we doing?
I think,
Can I read it to you?
yeah, please.
Probably an easy place.
It's the mission of Commitee to advance the job opportunities, health, general prosperity, and economic welfare of the people of Monroe County. This is accomplished by actively working to promote, attract, encourage, and develop economically sound commerce and industry for the purpose of preventing unemployment and economic deterioration. So it's like implied, but not.
It's implied, yeah.
So,
I think we can add the word housing
Yeah.
in two places.
Just add housing in it.
Yep.
And as we're working on this.
I think given it's gotta be in the mission statement, if we're doing it, this gives us cover. If
Yeah.
the study comes back, which nobody expects, we can always take it out.
Right.
So instead of putting it
More
in,
housing.
let's put it in now
Yeah.
and then talk ourselves out of it.
It implies it anyway, so if you wanna add it, it's fine.
Yeah.
We can,
That took us about 7 months.
We can draft that.
We'll draft it.
It's not gonna take us that long.
Comma, housing.
Yeah, basically.
Terrible.
So as a follow-up coming out of this, if we can do a draft on the revised mission statement, if we can take a look at if there are out-of-state studies.
Yeah.
And I think it would be really good to actually get the studies and the RFP that yielded that. And then, once we get that, I'm trying to think how we could speed this along. Is it possible to have, because what I'd love to do is at our next meeting, have a draft RFP.
Yeah.
And I'd rather not have another meeting to review
Yeah.
Right.
and then
Right.
come up with.
Yeah, I agree.
With a
I agree. I
draft.
totally agree with that.
So,
So let me just 1 minute, Norm. So if we can I'll throw this out there. If Robin, and Allison, if you guys can come up with some examples for us to look at, send it out to the team. And then what I would say is, maybe you and I can work together to get a draft RFP that we can send out and then meet to discuss that draft RFP instead of trying to put a draft RFP by committee. Let's at least get something for people to react to. I think that'll
Isn't this a
speed
great
things.
job for your associate?
We have a new associate helping out.
I need an associate.
Right.
So just before, is everybody good with that?
Sure.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Absolutely.
It's great.
Feasible
you
for
said
staff.
it, we had to be good with it.
No.
My goodness. What is Erie County doing? What is Albany County doing? And what is Onondaga and Schenectady?
So Erie County has a pretty ironclad housing policy that I think we've talked about it in previous governance committee meetings. Onondaga has made some changes in light of Micron.
Did Erie County do a study to inform that
That we don't
policy, or
know.
did
I
they
don't
just put a
believe
policy
so.
together?
But
They
remember,
have-
they're different.
Yeah, I'll sum it up very quickly.
The Amherst do a study.
There you go.
Yeah.
So
Amherst does,
Erie
yeah.
County has several suburban IDAs that dabble in housing much more than Erie County IDA itself. They kind of have an unspoken rule that they don't do new construction housing. They do adaptive reuse. If there's an adaptive reuse
Right.
project, they'll do housing that way. Onondaga, years ago, they would not do housing at all.
Yep.
Wouldn't touch it. We're not doing it. It's progressed more and more, and now with the Micron project,
They need housing.
they virtually have an obligation to do housing at this point. But I think looking at our close, and also Westchester, similar demographic, would be good. And I know at least one downstate city who put housing right in their UTAP to make sure to incentivize the type of housing they wanted to do. And that was New Rochelle. So,
I'm not sure.
But the question would be that,
yeah.
that sounds like people sitting around a table saying, here's what we want.
Yeah,
I guess, it's
I
much
don't
more,
know that-
did they have studies that informed that? And
Not
that's
that
really,
I don't know.
if we could look
Yeah.
into
So
it.
Find
perhaps
out.
going out of state, we may get more information quicker
Yep,
and more similar size
yeah,
as Rochester.
yeah,
I think that's a great idea.
yeah.
We will do that homework and find out in
That would
short
be great.
order.
It's like a different world.
And we're not putting more work on their shoulders
From an
because, what
income
was that
basis
again?
would be
New
a
associate.
lot
Oh, it's a different,
Sorry, I shouldn't have done
much
that.
higher income, but
The young lady who was here last,
She
kind
was
of on a
here
grander
last-
scale, they're dealing with similar
She'll be,
needs.
I'm getting used to her being
Because
here,
there's
so I
that
forgot to bring
spillover
her.
from New York City, so
Right.
So
while
does
there's a
that
lot of
sound
high
appropriate,
income,
next
there's a lot of
steps
low
coming out of here?
I didn't
income.
realize.
Yeah.
Anything we
And the
missed?
municipalities that are opposed.
I
to
want to bring up one
development.
thing before we end today, just food for thought. Not necessarily just housing, but any project that we give a tax abatement to has effects on everybody. Whether it's, a Fairlife building or whatever it is. And certain projects that are gonna create a number of jobs, then that makes total sense. Because the number of those, the money that's brought in from those employees, right? That justifies it. But if it's not a large number of employees, I think you gotta be very, very cautious what we take off tax rolls. Because it has a domino effect on other people. And I watch, and I'll give you guys an example recently. So we have a guy that works for us, and he has 3 kids, owned a house in Gates. They did a reeval, his property taxes went up, can't afford the house, and it ended up getting to me because his boss's boss called me and said, hey, can we help with an apartment? Well, I don't have any apartments that have 4 bedrooms, right? And I can't put him in a 2-bedroom, it's against the housing laws with 3 kids. So, and the guy can't afford, he's got a house, he's got a mortgage, he can't afford it anymore, so now he's selling the house. And that's just like, that's a tough spot to be in, and there's a lot of people in that spot. And our property taxes are so high that when we take stuff off the tax rolls, we affect those people, right? So that guy's forced in a box, he can't get an apartment, can't go to low income, so he's have to rent a house. Probably not in a spot where he wants his kids, but it is what it is. So I'm throwing that out there to you.
It's great perspective.
We just have to make sure, when we go, yep, you get a property tax abatement, it affects a lot of people, right? And when you, now sales tax and mortgage tax is a little different. That's completely different. Property tax is a little different.
We want to
effect.
help further projects that wouldn't happen without the abatement. That's the whole point.
Correct.
It's a carrot. And we
And
want
that
the
are
carrot
needed.
to attract projects that, like a Fairlife, where they would have gone to
Right.
Pennsylvania.
Correct.
if
And look
not
at
for a
the
pilot.
jobs. Like Fairlife was a great thing to bring in.
Yes.
Those
are the
jobs
kinds
will
of projects
offset
we want.
everything that we did there. Like that makes total sense.
One thing that, it's just a thought exercise I go through, I look at, and I don't know if it's helpful for people, but I'm gonna say it anyway. If you take a look and say, in the absence of everything else, if we had 50 of those projects, 100 of those projects, what would our community look like? So an example, if we had 50 Fairlives come in, I think it would be fairly easy to say, yes, that would add to the vibrancy.
Be
of
fantastic.
it. Now let's take, let's pick a project. I'm gonna pick on something I didn't vote for, Topgolf. If we had 50 Topgolfs, would we look any different? In the absence of not having 50 Fairlives, I don't know that,
That makes sense.
so just
Makes
for
sense.
whatever it's worth.
So how do you feel about projects that are just retaining jobs?
That are just what?
Retaining their jobs due to, like, they're struggling and they need benefits.
But
to
they're
help them-
industrial projects
To be able to
in
stay here, otherwise they're
manufacturing,
leaving.
yeah.
Same thing,
That's a-
right? That's the same situation. So if there's a company that, let's say it employs, 50 people, 20 people, whatever it is. And they will come in front of us and they're struggling and they can show that, hey, here's things that happen that have nothing to do with us, that out of our control. And you want to give them benefits to keep the jobs in Monroe County, that makes sense to me.
Or if another IDA is giving them a sweetheart deal.
That's what we did. We got Constellation to move to Monroe from
Yeah.
Ontario.
So if another, if another team is giving them a better deal, do we compete?
These are all important things to be thinking about. But yeah, to your point, Joe, it's information asymmetry that, as Jay mentioned earlier, where sometimes a project owner will come to us and say, hey, this project isn't going to happen without IDA benefits, and look at all these great positive impacts of this project. And we have to take them at their word.
I agree.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, but what we really want to focus on are, those mega projects, those white whale projects are our favorite, the Fairlifes of the world. Our bread and butter are really retention jobs, sales tax exemptions on, renovations at manufacturing and industrial type projects. Sometimes a spec warehouse build is going to be one that comes before us. We've had conversations about those at the board level where you can draw the connection to job creation, but it's indirect. There's so much gray area in all of this,
Right.
And none of us has a crystal ball.
But I think one thing I know for sure, and what keeps me coming back here, is everybody here is well intended.
Mm-hmm.
Where we're all trying to do the right thing, and it's complicated and it's not easy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we continue down the path we're on and we just keep
That's
working
the right-
hard.
Yep,
Get the
that's
data
right
that we need to
perspective,
make
and
the decisions.
we're in a better place than we were 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And we want to be in a better place 3 years from now than we are now. And these are the right questions, recognizing that we can't tackle them all at once.
And
But I think
notice
we-
in that mission statement that you read, nowhere in there does it say corporate welfare, developers' bottom lines. It doesn't say anything about that.
And no one's going to come before us and say, hey, I don't really need these benefits, but.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm gonna be profitable without it, but hey.
Heard anyone?
Yeah, I thought I'd ask,
I mean, they know the playbook.
Yeah. Bottom line is IDAs exist since 1972 because New York State is a higher tax state. And since that time frame, we've been losing, other states were coming to eat our lunch, and attracting our employers to other states. And we developed IDAs to try to stem that tide and to facilitate and to level the playing field and make New York State more competitive. And so we want to just always bear in mind, like, the origin story of industrial development agencies. Yes, it's not to enrich developers, it's to incentivize good economic development.
That's exactly right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So.
Any other comments? I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
A motion.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. We are adjourned.